and welcome to Better Than Your Creator on AI and Creativity. In this episode, I sit down with Professor Itai Yanai, a leading scientist in computational medicine, genomics, and system biology, whose research has led to groundbreaking discoveries published in some of the most prestigious scientific journals. But beyond the science itself, Itai has spent years studying something even more fundamental: how discoveries happen. Together with his colleague Martin Lercher, he developed the concept of night science, the playful and deeply human side of creativity in science. We talk about why breakthroughs often emerge from humor, why getting stuck is an essential part of the creative process, and why children may be better innovators than adults, and how one seemingly absurd conversation led to a fascinating discovery about human cells. And of course, we ask the question that sits at the heart of this podcast: if creativity relies on curiosity, exploration, mistakes, and even feeling lost, what happens when AI enters this process? Enjoy the episode. So, hi, Itai Yanai. Thank you for joining our show.
Hi, Shirley. Thank you so much for having me.
So I would like to start directly with a question related to what you do, to give just our listeners just some background about yourself. So you are an expert in computation medicine, biochemistry, and genome. But you've spent years mapping out something that is called the night science versus the day science. And I would like you first to explain a little bit about this term. And just because you had so many discoveries during your scientific careers, and one of the newest ones, the recent ones that was published in the Nature magazine, is related to discovery about cancer cells, and how cancer cells kind of learn how to adapt themselves and change to be better at fighting the treatment and the cure, which is, it's dangerous on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's a discovery that can lead us to the right cure. So my question was, did you discover all that through night science or day science? And I'm really curious to know.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way I think about it is that whenever there's anything sort of good in our lives, anything beautiful and accomplished, anything that we're proud of, it's always the result of a process. There's a process behind it. It's not just dumb luck. It's not an act, but an actual process. And so with this discovery of, we call it cellular learning, how do cells learn? It's really the result of both day science and night science. So I guess at this point, I should take a step back and say, what do these terms mean? And basically what it means is that if whenever there's something good that comes, something that we're proud of, it's the result of a process. What is that process? You know, like you say, I've spent my life making discoveries, and I really love my career of being a scientist. It's just, I'm so happy with the career I chose, because I just go in every day and just follow my wonder. How does this world work? And after doing it so many times, after going through this process, you start to see a pattern. And so over the last few years, I've been writing about what this pattern is. And basically the pattern is that this process involves two distinct minds, two distinct ways of thinking. Maybe with AI we can automate them. I don't know. That's really, really interesting. But the point is that it's two complementary ways of thinking. There's the day science mind and the night science mind. The day science mind is executive. It gets things done. It's very, we all know these people who we really admire how they can get things done. They have their to-do list, and they're very competent, and that's required in science. And I would say in any creative process, you need to be able to get things done. But is that all? Is that everything? No, you also need to decide what it is that you want to get done. And that's the night science process. It's the ideation. It's the thinking. It's the crazy ideas late at night. It's the connections that we made. And so what I've seen is that, if we return to your question of how is it that we make a discovery, like what was that discovery of cellular learning in cancer cells? Where did that come from? It's both day science, night science. Have the idea, test it, go back and forth. That's the process.
Can you recall like how did that happen that you started with one kind of research and then you ended up finding out that actually the cancer cells are a little bit like algorithmic minds that really optimize themselves according to a cure, because it's not exactly like evolution, right? It's like you took something from a completely different field. Maybe it
Yeah.
is biology, but it's not oncology, and you just kind of discovered it. So can you say if it was that an aha moment?
It's so interesting, with aha moments. I think there's a kind of almost dangerous misnomer, dangerous myth in creativity that is the aha moment. In my experience, there are aha moments, but if you dissect them carefully and you ask, how did it actually happen? It's really a series of small aha moments. And it's a series of discussions. It's every day coming in, it's every day rolling it around. And you really need all of the discussions. Sometimes we have a meeting and we feel like it was a failure. Like, we just talked for an hour and it feels like nothing happened, right? And I think what I realized is no, something did happen. If you really look back a year later, all of those discussions were necessary. And so I can tell you though that sometimes there are these aha moments. And one thing that's interesting about them is that, well, there's a series of aha moments, like I said, but with this one with cancer, what was funny is that, well, first of all, it had the hallmark that we call "it takes two to think." That all of the interesting things happen when you're actually in a discussion with another person, maybe with an AI agent. For me, that happens less often. For me, it's more talking with a friend. And another interesting thing is that when we have the idea, it feels like a joke. There's an element of humor to it, and I really remember this one breakthrough that we made. So it's a postdoctoral fellow in my lab, Gustavo Franca, and we were working on this problem. We were getting so kind of sad that the project was not moving. We didn't have the idea, and one time we were just relaxing in my office, and I was going through again the story, like, here, let's say it again, what we don't understand. And then I was talking about this one part, and he said, "Well, what if this is actually the main part?" And in his mind, he was saying that as a joke, like he was trying to make me laugh, because what happened was, whenever you work on a problem, you're sort of working in one plane, and there are sort of certain rules and patterns that are allowed in this one. Like, you're working in one field, like you mentioned ecology. So maybe you're working in ecology, and there's all the ecological terms that you work with. And really, what a discovery is, I wonder if we can automate this, is a bit of a transgression. A discovery is like breaking the law, in a sense. You have to be a bit mischievous. And so what Gustavo did was he made this joke. And that's also interesting because jokes allow you to break the law. Jokes allow you to make transgressions. And he made this joke. He was just trying to make me laugh. He confessed later. And he said, "Well, what if it's this that's the important thing and not this?" And so in our world, in our sort of little make-believe science world, that was a really funny joke. And we both laughed because that was so ridiculous. And we laughed and we laughed. And then we said, wait a minute, that's right, that's what it is. And that's how it all started, that humor sort of allowed us to make this transgression.
That's crazy, because we had previously other guests in the podcast, even from the marketing field. And this one marketer he was the CMO of one of the companies. And he was saying that what AI cannot do is humor, because humor is unexpected. And that's why, like, the human creativity is based basically on humor. It's kind of the same family.
I think it's really interesting. So I started reading this book that was written so many years ago by Arthur Kessler. It's called The Act of Creation. And he writes this 750-page book, like really long book, about what is creativity. And the whole first 100 pages in this huge book about creativity, it's all about humor. And that's really interesting. And so when you say that AI can't do humor, I always think about how creative people are And there's probably a graduate student in Silicon Valley that is hearing you say this, and they're thinking, oh, I bet I could make AI understand humor. And so it's only a matter of time before AI can do it.
I have to say it's harder than it seems because, and I saw from the things that you wrote about night science is, connecting very far dots and just letting your mind loose and all these kind of concepts that we know are related to creativity. But on the other hand, there is a way we thought was very easy to do it with AI, right? To just lower the temperature or the
Yeah.
predictability of the next token or,
Right, right, right.
it didn't work that way. It just didn't make any sense. And in that sense, I wanted to ask you, I mean, you were talking about how for night science, you need a human or a friend to talk to and just talk nonsense to each other. I wanted to ask you if you've ever tried it with AI, and do you think that AI can do it like the same? Can you create the same partnership with an AI?
I think it's a really interesting question. I must confess, it hasn't worked so much for me, although there was crucial progress that I did make once, and AI did help me. For some reason, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's psychological for me, but I don't. I run to it for stupid things. Like, we were earlier having trouble with getting connected to this website to make this recording. I I did go to ChatGPT and I asked it some questions how to do this. So I go to it for little things. I just find that I don't go to it for the big things, but that's probably just a generational thing for me. I talk to many young people and I see that they're cheap sometimes about buying a coffee, but they're not cheap about paying the monthly rate for Pro Claude. So I think the young people adapt, this technology very quickly, and they seem to be building relationships with it, and somehow they're even saying that they think the AI is conscious. So it should be possible, and there's a lot of potential because like we've been saying, having an idea many times is making a connection to another field. And AI, if it knows in its model so many different fields, it should be able to make connections that, it should be able to make better connections. It's just that what I find is that in making connections, anyone can make a connection. The crucial thing is to know which connection to make. Like, what is the right connection? What is the one that's going to lead to progress? And for us, it has to do with like style and taste and aesthetic sense and all the projects that we've done before. They build us, with every project that you do in your career, it changes you and it tells you what you like and sort of you bring that sense to your next project. It's interesting to ask if AI can do that too.
It's interesting because I was wondering if you think that true creativity requires the human feeling of being lost. I mean, many times we go through a process and we have a dead end, we're getting stuck or even making a mistake. I had a whole episode about making mistakes because it's so human. And it's true that AI makes mistakes, but I'm not sure it's the same feeling when you get a mistake or to even have this motivation to get out of this dead end. Or do you have like the AI doesn't feel lost? So do you think it is a part of it, just like the motivation itself to to find a solution to something?
It's really interesting, right? The AI doesn't feel despair, doesn't feel frustration, and so with the whole night science thing, it's a project I should say that it's together with my best friend Martin Lurcher. We've been doing this for many years, and we have workshops. And the way we start out the workshop is by saying, well, we've all had this feeling that we start something with all our motivations and our goodwill and our excitement, and then inevitably we get stuck, right? And when you first get stuck, it's kind of scary and many people quit, except that after you quit, you realize, well, in the next project that you choose, you will also get stuck. So the getting stuck is actually a requirement. Getting stuck, we say, is really what it means when you're stuck is that you're facing a real problem, a real unknown. And in science, we're tackling things that are at the edge of knowledge. So you should be expected to feel stuck. So how does that relate to AI? I don't know.
How do you teach this process to scientists, and do you do that to other audiences as well? Because it's also very similar to innovation process, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So the whole idea of night science is that we need to create space for it. It's not something that happens without you allowing for it, without you sort of explicitly saying we're going to do it. Because in our world, maybe it's something about our culture, about our way our lives work. We're very sort of efficient driven. We want to get things done. If we have a meeting for 1 hour, we want to see an outcome. We want to see that we make progress. So, what do you mean you had a meeting and you just talked about ideas? That sounds like you were just having fun. It's not work. And so the night science idea is that we need to have a kind of sandbox. We need to have a place where we can play because no ideas can happen if you don't make room for them. And like I said at the beginning, it's a different mind. Whereas I think that the biggest difference, if I had to explain it in one word, is that there's a time when we judge ideas. And we humans, we like to judge. We like to say, oh, I like this. Oh, I don't like that. What's your favorite color? We're always judging. In night science, we have to put that aside because it turns out, and neuroscientists are actually discovering this, that we humans, we cannot do the following two things at the same time. We cannot both judge and improvise at the same time. You cannot both at the same time have the idea and say if it's good or bad. It's two different processes. And so night science is, let's not judge for a second. We're not going to judge. We're just going to improvise. We're going to play. We're going to create. And it's a different kind of mind because it allows you to step outside of your expertise and make connections to other fields. It allows you to make metaphors and analogies and explore what they make. It allows you to ask, did I even define this problem correctly? Am I even asking the right question? Maybe there's a different question. And if you're in a meeting and you're trying to get things done and one person in the meeting is saying, is this even the right question? Then you want to tell them, please shut up. You're just distracting us. And so that's why we do need, I'm not saying all meetings need to be improvisational, but there needs to be some room for it in the process. And so in the night science workshop, what we say is to scientists, although now we're actually, it's amazing how it seems to be like a really general message, and we should be talking to entrepreneurs and to artists also, and maybe we're even talking to high schools. So it's really exciting to think that this could help us in doing better discoveries, doing better processes. And so the thing is that, of course, there's no recipe for making a discovery, but what there is are a set of tools, and these tools are general tools, and they can help you have ideas. So we have a bunch of sessions, and every session teaches you a different tool. For example, one session is, we call it the import-export, which is this reckoning that, hey, if you think that the next idea that you need is coming from within your field, you're probably wrong. The next idea that you need to move your project is probably maybe from ecology, something totally different, maybe from game theory, maybe from architecture. Ideas are everywhere and ideas are general. And a fantastic way to make progress is to know how to import ideas from other fields.
So do you have any example for that or a case study from one of the workshops that someone actually had a discovery from following that process? Or did you ever encounter such a story?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the time. So what happens is we'll have a workshop for about 100 people, 100 participants. And then every exercise that we do is always to put people into pairs, because we find that in pairs, it's the most out of your head that you can come without also introducing politics. So you're not alone in your head, which is a very confusing place. You're talking outside, now you're outside of your head, but there's no politics. When there's a group of people, then there's all kinds of different dynamics. So we put people into one-on-ones, and invariably at the end of every exercise, people come back so excited that they've had so many ideas. And I can tell you, just like in my own skin, the ideas that come, because we have a rule in the workshop. Martin and I say we will never ask people to do something that we ourselves will not do. And so before we send people into an exercise, we do the exercise ourselves. We demonstrate it, which is very scary because we do it for real. Like, and it's in front of people. So imagine now a pair of people talking, but it's in front of a whole audience. It's very scary. But we've been doing this for a while, so we allow ourselves to do it. And sometimes nothing happens, seemingly, although I would argue it does happen because it moves along the thinking for the next conversation. But actually, many times, so one time Martin and I were doing the exercise, and like we have this one other session called "A Hypothesis is a Liability," and the idea there is that many times the next idea that we need in our project is actually right in front of us. It's right in front of us, right under our nose, but we cannot see it. In retrospect, later, if we look back on a project that took us a few years and we tell the story of how it happened, we realize that was so silly that it took us so long to have that idea because it was right there. How did we not see it?
Do you
And
feel like it was your judgment blocking it? Because I feel sometimes it's just us judging the crazy idea and then it just pops out again on the right
it could
time.
be, yeah, yeah. I mean, many times it could be the judging that, oh, maybe, maybe we weren't bold enough. We said, oh, who am I to do this? This is not my expertise. It could be something like that. But many times it's even more disturbing that no, it was right there. We just didn't see it. We call this the gorilla and the data because sometimes it's really hard to see. And the reason why it's hard to see is because we have many ideas in our head, and those ideas are blocking us from seeing something. All of our ideas are sort of different models of the world. And so when something unexpected is there, we actually are blind to it. We're selectively providing attention to other things. And so we become blind to things in front of us. So the exercise that Martin and I do for this tool is we describe a data set that we have to the other person, but we don't say why we collected the data. We don't say what we're looking. We just say, this is the data. And then the other person's job is to try to say, well, what would you do with the data? What would you look for? So Martin and I were doing this in front of an audience. And then I said, well, why not do this? And he said, I didn't think about that. That's a really good idea. And he went back to his lab. He talked to a PhD student, and now the PhD student is working on this idea. So things are ideating all the time right under our eyes. It's like we always think that having an idea is such a difficult thing, but I don't know, if we just make space for it, they just happen, they just flow.
How do you make sure this idea is actually, well, a lot of like the definition of creativity and even for innovation sometimes is having an original idea together with an idea that is useful, like usefulness together with originality, and which is something that I think it's very hard in the current architecture to find, because if it goes too crazy, then it makes no sense. It's only us human currently able to connect the dots into something useful. So the question is, where do you think, like at what part of the process do you start judging the idea? And how do you know this idea is going to be something useful? You said that he was making a joke and all of a sudden you just took that joke. I mean, how did that click?
Yeah. So, I would say that looking back on how I work, I think I try to delay as much as possible the judging of the idea. I really don't ask what is the value of the idea. For me, so then you might ask, well, okay, when something clicks, what does it mean to click? It has some kind of value. That's what clicking means. Well, for me, it's something different. For me, it's do I like the idea? Not because it has some value, but just because it gives me some kind of satisfaction. Like, I mean, I can tell you that even with this cellular learning, this thing that you mentioned that we published in Nature, so we don't know yet if it's going to be valuable. To me, it seems obvious that it will be eventually, but we don't know it yet. What I like about the idea is that whenever I think about it, I think, wow, that is so cool. That to me, it's just like, because I mean, let me say a few more words about what the discovery was. the discovery is that inside every cell, there really is a learning capability, much like AI. So this just the way that we build a model and have AI run and a model can learn, we found an aspect of the same capability happening inside a cell where a cell can choose its state by just trying to reduce stress so that the target function, the goal that it has is just to reduce stress. And there's a lot that we can learn from that for our own lives, right? If all the time we could just act to just reduce stress, that's actually a good way to live, right? Just always try to reduce stress. And the cell is trying to do that, and it has an algorithm for doing that. Now, will that be useful for curing cancer or in addressing other diseases? I don't know. I don't know. I expect it will. I hope it will. But even if it doesn't, I just think it's so cool. So for me, what drives my own work is a kind of search for an aesthetic pleasure almost. And that's why I think, if I were to give, I don't believe in giving career advice. I think it's a very personal thing. But maybe that's actually the point with this following career advice that I want to give, that whatever you do, it should just be something that you really sort of find very intrinsically interesting. Because, when I was starting out as a scientist, I wasn't really getting much recognition at all. I wasn't doing very well, but I still had a great time. I still loved it because for me, it wasn't connected to anything tangible like recognition. To me, it was just like, wow, I just think this is so cool that when I study the genome, this is like a text and it evolved over billions of years. This is amazing. And so, yeah, I wonder if we think about the process of making discoveries as trying delaying as much as possible the judging of the idea. Like maybe we could teach that to AI too, just to not judge so soon.
That's very interesting. I have to say that even when I read this research, or at least, the publication about this research, I felt it too. I felt it was aesthetic. I felt inspired by the fact that a cell, like a cancer cell, can learn. So it's not only something that you felt as the scientist, but also for me, I thought there must be some kind of something we can learn from it to, I don't know, to our own learning. It must be some kind of a metaphor for another field as well, because it
Yeah.
was aesthetic. I think that other people felt it too. And I'm pretty sure that it can find cure for cancer later.
Thank you. I'm very much in what's called basic science. And maybe it's not the best term. Some people call it fundamental science, but the whole idea of basic science is that you are not studying a particular disease. And you might say, well, why are you not studying a disease? Like, go to a hospital. People are dying all the time. And so it only makes sense for us to try to cure diseases. And I understand that argument. It's a very compelling argument, right? That people are dying of cancer. What are we, if we can do something about it, then we must, right? The problem is that history shows us, the history of science shows us that actually, and this is a crazy thing that still fills me with wonder, but it's true that what we've seen is if you just let people follow their interest, follow their aesthetic sense, just play around with things that they just find beautiful, then what happens is they will make discoveries on things that are seemingly totally unrelated. So many breakthroughs into cancer actually came from people not even knowing about cancer, never even thinking about studying cancer. And that's the magic of basic science. A discovery is an unknown unknown. You don't know what you're going to discover. I mean, if you do know what you're going to discover, then you could say it's not really a discovery because you knew you were going to discover. And so it's a magical thing about basic science that you cannot say ahead of time what the goal will be. That must have some implications too for how we use AI, right? You could think about, well, how do you let AI make a discovery on things that it wasn't even prompted to? Imagine like you write a prompt and then it makes a discovery on something totally different.
And this was one of my questions to you, if you think or feel that it depends how much you use AI. And you said not so often, but even for your students, from what you see, I mean, what part of this creative process, or you call it like the night science process, which part of it will always remain human? Because obviously like AI can connect the dots, so we know that, but and it has a lot of knowledge and it follows the rules. So if you tell the AI or the different LLMs, just follow this particular rule of connecting different areas, and it will follow, but what part will still remain human?
I don't know. I think these are really interesting times. Like we're living in 2026. This is a very interesting time. One can make the argument that nothing is actually human. Nothing is actually intrinsically human. And that the reason is that the way our brains appear to us to work is as a neural net. It's a bunch of neurons wired together. Well, what's AI? The way we built these models is actually by emulating the way our brains work. And so it's conceivable that anything we can do, we can train a machine to do. And I think that that is a really tough thing for us to truly internalize. I think to go back to the hospitals where people are dying, if AI can be so powerful that it can help us and it can prevent our loved ones from dying, then it can do a lot of good, right? Like, I work in a hospital. And so you see, it's very hard for me to ignore the fact that people are dying in hospitals every day. If there's something we could do about it, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. And then I guess to get more closer to your question though is about the creative process. Could the entire thing be automated? That's really interesting, right? Like, can you will my job be replaced by?
I think one of the questions is that also you talked about something that is called like puzzle switching.
Yeah.
It's basically about how you let your subconscious take a little bit more space, and I guess that LLMs, they don't have it. They don't have the subconscious from this stage of thinking. Can you explain a little bit about that?
First of all, that's interesting. I never thought about AI having or not having a subconscious. So, yeah, the idea with puzzle switching is that when we go to college, we go to the university, we take classes like, let's say, physics, and then we do problems. So there's a problem that we need to solve. And the thing about that problem that's interesting is that it's well defined. Like, you know exactly what kind of a problem you're in, what kind of a puzzle this is. And then you graduate from the university and you go and you do a PhD. And a PhD now is a totally different game than an undergraduate game. The undergraduate game, you solve puzzles. Then when you go to a PhD, you realize that it's a totally different game from doing your undergrad. When you're in the university, the problems are well defined, but in your PhD, you're not even sure that you're in the room that you think you're in. You're not even sure that you've defined the puzzle correctly. And we realize that there's many different kinds of ways that you could define your problem. You could think about it like it's a jigsaw puzzle, putting the pieces together. You could think about it like a logical puzzle. Maybe there's a mathematical model that you can use to fit what you're studying. You could think about it like a connection from the outside is what's required. You can think about it like it's an out-of-the-box discovery, like you have to switch the foreground and the background. And so there's different ways that you could define your problem. And many of us just take one day to decide what puzzle we're in and then spend the next days to solve that problem. But in night science, we try to think, are we actually in the room that we think we're in? What would happen if we look at our same problem, but reformulate it as a different kind of puzzle? Could that help us to make progress? And it helps us many times in my own work. Like we say, well, what if we, let's see, what if we think about this not like it's a logical puzzle the way we've been doing, but rather that we need another idea. Well, what could that idea be? And so these are all things that we're not trained to do. Actually, we just graduate from undergrad and now people tell us, okay, now you need to discover something. Well, what are the tools that we have for discovery? What are the What are the thinking patterns that are required? And so now let's see, if could AI implement that?
I think in that sense, if you gave a kid to do that, to do this PhD, it would be easier for a kid than it would be for an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is that? Why is that easier for a kid?
Read a book and I can't go through one page without him asking me so many questions. And I know it's such a cliche, but right, the kids can do everything. And I used to think it's not true and it's just like a cliche, but no, it's not. He's
Yeah,
keeping asking me the questions, why is this and why is that? And we are so much trained during the whole life, we are trained to, again, to be judgmental. And
exactly.
as you mentioned earlier, we are so trained to do that. It's so hard for us to ask, is this the right question? And a child just does it very, very easily.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, in AI, they call this the difference between exploration and exploitation. So in reinforcement learning, there's an actual parameter usually that says to what degree is the model going to explore versus exploit. And, kids are all about exploration. They're just like asking. But then with time, we begin to shift our attention to be more and more for exploitation. Like we found something that works for us and we just keep doing that thing that works, because we see that it gives us something and less we start to explore. And so I think for discovery, we need to realize that we need the exploration. The exploration looks childish, almost literally, because it's inefficient. And yet, every time there's a breakthrough, all the things that we admire, all the good outputs, the end of good processes, they all, if you study them deeply, you see that there was a period of exploration. And so that's what sort of we've been talking about ideation versus judging. That's really exploration versus exploitation.
And I love the fact that you use the term ideation. For me, ideation in the past used to be something like, just like you describe it, something very messy, exploring. But sometimes when I talk to people, for example, in the startup ecosystem, many times when they say ideation, and it was sad for me to hear that they are exploring, but they're exploring very judgmental. Somehow, with the world that we're living in today, it became very mixed up, the exploration part and the exploitation part. And somehow ideation kind of became a very analytic process of,
Yeah, transactional and yeah, I regret that. I think that's a really good point. I like that. I think that's very sad, and we need to protect ideation. Ideation needs to stay pure
right.
and sort of free from judgment. I think many different fields have discovered this truism, this rule that we humans cannot simultaneously create and judge. And if you try to put them together, judge will always win. The judgment is very strong and it can kill the exploration, ideation, creation. It's
That's
very strong. And that's why kids, kids can shut off judgment. They can, and that's what's wonderful about them. And yeah, a lot of our schooling, if there was one thing I could change about school, what I would change is to create a space for judgment-free thinking. I'm
Mm.
not saying everything should be judgment-free. I'm just saying half of it should be, because that's half of the process. And right now, the way we do school is there's always one right answer, right? And why do we make, 2 plus 2 is always 4. Asking open-ended questions like, which additions lead to the number 4? Well, that could be 0 and 4, -1 and 5, many answers to lead to 4. Instead, we ask, what's 2 plus 2, where there's only one right answer. Because why? Because that's something we can judge very clearly. And so a lot of our schooling is just sort of, directing us away from exploration, and that's a very, very sad thing. I think wonder if now with AI and agentic AI, the secret could be to have different kinds of agents, where maybe one agent could lead to accurate results, and the other, if it hallucinates, that's actually good. That's a nice exploration.
Yeah, actually, we had an episode from a researcher whose PhD is in education and AI. She's a data scientist, actually, but she's doing her PhD. They were trying to make an AI that can assess open-ended questions of students. And one of their discoveries, by the way, that they weren't planned to discover it, was that AI was really, really bad at it because it just couldn't assess open-ended questions because the mistakes were so different. I mean, in other words, the variance was too high in the mistakes. And anyways, they're trying to solve this, but I think like what you mentioned is very important, the open questions and the open answers. And this is something that we need to work on. But going back to you, I have to ask, like, can you remember of a time that this kind of thinking, creative thinking, helped you through something hard or just like solve the problem for you? Can you recall something that happened?
All the time, all the time. I had a student in my lab, Bo, and Bo's first project in the lab was he 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 created this data set, and the reason we created it was to study one thing, but then we realized he went to all this trouble to create the data. It was a beautiful data set, but it beautifully showed that his idea was wrong. But now we still had the data, and it was beautiful data. It was just asked, like, maybe it's good for something else. And we would just meet and talk in a really open-ended way. And in the end, we just got to this question that was so unexpected, so I can give you a little bit more details. It was about studying the cells in the testes, and the testes, you have muscle, you have a brain, you have a liver, all these cells, and they all turn on just a few genes. But the testes turns on all the genes. And it was so strange. We just started asking, like, what's so important about the testes that it needs to turn on all the genes? It's crazy. And I think it's really interesting to kind of adopt this like jokey, humorous attitude, like we were saying before about humor. But in this case, we were trying to anthropomorphize and say, well, like, what would I do if I was the testes? What would I do? And you ask these kinds of questions. It's very kind of like silly questions, or you ask, it's doing something crazy. Like, why would it do something so crazy? Why? What is it trying to do? And if anybody sensible walked into the room, anybody like judgmental, they might say, well, you can't ask questions like that. It's not like the testes is thinking. It's not like it's intending to do anything. So it sounds like silly questions. But by asking them, it really made us think. And then in the end, we had this idea, well, maybe it's turning on these genes, not because it wants the functions of the genes, but maybe it's doing it because it wants to make sure that the code is okay. Like it just wants to touch the DNA. And if there's any problems with it, it's trying to fix it. And that was just a crazy idea at first. But then, it came about because we were in this free, like loose, free association kind of thinking. And then it gave us an idea. Now the meeting is over and we have the idea. Once you have the idea, now you can become judgmental. Now you can say, well, how do you test it? We have in my lab the most high-tech tools. It's like a really high-powered lab with cutting edge we can do so many kinds of testing, so many new data sets you can create. Now we can rigorously test. Now is the time to be judgmental and to try to kill the idea. And that's really the beauty of night science, day science, is that you make this sandbox of ideas where you can say crazy things, and someone judgmental might think you're silly, but they're wrong. Because what they don't see is that is just one half of the process. Once you have the idea, you turn on your other mind, and then you become very rigorous. And so I think the magic is to go back and forth. It's true for being a scientist. I suspect it's true for anything, for an architect, for a doctor, for an accountant, for an artist. An artist, think about an artist. They have to execute a painting, be very detailed and worry about the whole kinds of realities of paint and things like that. But then they also need to step back and think conceptually, like, what is the idea that they're trying to convey? It's always back and forth, back and forth. And for artists, if we only teach them how to deal with paint, just the craft, we really wouldn't be teaching them to be good artists at all. That's just one part. That's just the day art, right? What about the night art, the reflecting, the connecting with other concepts, the observing? You need that in art as well.
Right. You need that basically in anything if you want to be different or if you want to innovate something. It doesn't matter if it's in science or anything.
Exactly. There's always this process. And I think it's a very deep principle that you need to have the two minds. I come across it from science, but it's very easy to kind of note that it's there everywhere.
I am very curious to know, did you tested the hypothesis and did you find out that actually it was running all this DNA just to test?
Yeah, so we tested it and we published it in the journal Cell a few years ago. And the thing about science is you have the highest possible thing, which is called a theory. So even that can also be proved wrong eventually. Nothing is sure for us, but we did a number of tests and it looks like that's the reason. So am I sure? Never,
Yeah.
but we accumulated a lot of evidence. So it's very suggestive.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for this inspiring talk. You definitely brought a lot of angles that I've never heard of,
Cool.
including
Thank you.
the kind of humor part. I'm going to use it, I have to say. I hope other people could be affected by this talk and just try to loosen up a little bit when they ideate.
Loosen up and instead of saying no, but try to say yes and.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Itai, for joining
Thank
us.
you, Shirley. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.